So let's talk about sovereignty because I keep using this word. Sovereignty is a way of being where you are the ultimate authority in your life, right? So even the definition of sovereign means that like that thing keeps its authority within itself. So you are the decider, you are the creator, you are the operator in your life and in what it is that you want to create and in bringing your vision and your dreams to life. And in like having the relationships that you want, the health that you want, the career that you would like. You are the authority for you in all these areas. Now, I want to name that there are things in the world that impacts us, right? And I still have the authority within myself to address these things, to show up to this complicated, messy world and have my vision at the center of my world, right? So like, I was socialized as a woman, right? Like in other videos, I talk about being, kind of more on the non-binary spectrum, but like I grew up with this socializing around that to like let go of myself, to put other people first. So I think this sort of idea, I think really resonates with folks, right? With women, with AFAB individuals, with queer folks, with anybody that has had your power kind of taken away and messaging subtle or overt that you don't get to have the life that you want, right? So that's why I'm like so very much about sovereignty. I needed to have this as a practice and the embodiment in my life, and I'm offering this too as if it's helpful for anybody else. So with a sovereign way of being, everything comes back to you. It has to. You have to be the one that shows up for you. So I approach this as a sort of practice of reorienting or recentering into myself when I notice a level of self-abandonment. I have abandonment wounds, so I had learned a sort of others-focused, self-abandonment way of being. And so I needed to approach sovereignty as a commitment to myself, right? Like an acknowledgement like, hey, I'm a sovereign being. I get to choose, I get to create, I get to show up for myself. And as a practice where I know that just because I'm making that commitment doesn't mean that my ingrained habits and the things that sort of I was indoctrinated into doesn't mean that it won't come up or that I won't have to sort of reorient myself away from that back to me. And I will say, it gets easier. So I feel like now a lot more my sense of sovereignty is much more embodied than when I started my practice. And it's become much easier and almost automatic to show up for myself and to act in a sovereign way in my life, right? Like I'm not doing this over anybody else. This isn't power over. This is just embodying the power that I have for me in my life to create the things. And I will say, even like to my own surprise sometimes, I'll just notice that there's so much more ease in like if I need to communicate something, if I need to advocate for myself in some way, I'm just like doing it. And I will say like over time, and maybe not even too long, you get a real sense of satisfaction in showing up for yourself and seeing what happens in the world by virtue of just being like, hey, no to that, or hey, I need this thing over here. And and it feels a lot better than the self-abandonment felt, because I know self-abandonment gives you kind of a momentary relief, right? Because you don't have to show up to what feels scary or a conflict or whatever. Or, like sometimes when you advocate for yourself, it can feel like creating a conflict, even though that's not what it is, right? If you're a people pleaser, you're someone who defaults into fawning being, a trauma response, then it can feel really sort of intense in your nervous system when you start advocating for yourself and showing up for yourself. But it gets easier, absolutely. And we're going to talk about how we practice this. So, cultivating sovereignty within yourself. Like I said, I approach this as a sort of a reorientation, which means that I kind of assume my default is going to be what I already know it to be, right? That if I was used to being others focused, like looking out, maybe hypervigilant in some ways, or maybe just the self-abandonment, then what you can really do that would be powerful is to notice those signs and the feeling inside yourself when you're drawn to abandon yourself, right? So notice, for example, external focus. Have I shifted from being in a place where I'm being present to my body and myself and what I'm feeling is whether I have a yes or a no in this situation, whether I feel tense or relaxed, whether I have moved or have I moved up into my mind and now I'm sort of observing and trying to feel into how someone else feels as a way of maybe softening that or something if they seem activated. Like, have I moved out of my centeredness within me and I'm now sort of like reaching out, reaching into other people's worlds and things and being others focused. And you could also see this when there's like a subtle or maybe not so subtle waiting mode within yourself. Do you have, maybe you've experienced this where something is occurring and you feel yourself waiting for something. Like something has to change out there for you to make a move or for you to decide on something or for you to feel a certain way. Just to notice when there's a waiting feeling. Am I waiting for something? Okay. I've shifted out of my sovereign center then, because my sovereign center gets to decide, and I get to choose what I want, and I get to know what it is that I feel, and I get to show up for that. If I'm waiting, I've sort of shrunk back from being in my sovereign presence. And then you can also reflect on relationships. Like how do you show up in relationships? For example, like, do you wait for other people to break up with you before you end a relationship that's not working? Do you choose not to be the one that ends it so that you can avoid the conflict or the tough emotional conversations? Do you then tolerate disrespect in relationships or low effort from others or anything that that doesn't really align with you? It doesn't even have to be something bad, but just for you personally, it doesn't align with your values or just your way of being or your way of wanting to be in a relationship, but you keep tolerating it. So noticing any place you're tolerating things, that can be a form of self-abandonment. And then even times am I staying in friendships? And it doesn't even have to be romantic relationships. Am I staying in friendships, because I don't want to deal with the backlash of what it would be to maybe end that or to change it or to advocate for it to change in some way? Or even, in family relationships. Have I just been sort of avoiding people when maybe I need to have a conversation? Sometimes it's like, if you know them and they're not going to change, then, do what you need to do, right? That could be showing up in your sovereign self. But maybe just notice when, does there need to be a conversation? Do I need to ask for something or set a boundary? And like, am I sort of waiting or am I pulling back or am I just not choosing to do that? I'm afraid or something like that. And then we can also look at areas like in our health. Do you sort of like start and stop in your health journey, but never fully take ownership over your health? And I'm talking about this from someone who understands chronic illness. So like, notice even like, as I say that, right, that question of like, do you start and stop with your health journey? Did you immediately think, oh, this person's advocating for me to just exercise every single day and all of that, right? Like, no. Because that's not your health journey. That might have been somebody else's advice, but like, what is actually going to work for you? And that's when you are in your sovereign presence and in your sovereign way of being, when you're able to even show up to these things where everybody and their mother's dog has a advice and thoughts about what you should be doing, an opinion about the right way to do something. And I forgot what I said. And do you find yourself sort of defaulting to just trying to find somebody to give you the answer rather than actually exploring what's going to work for you? And if we're not willing to explore that, we can do a lot of start and stop, because we might start on someone's advice, but then it doesn't actually work. But I was looking for it to be the answer, and so then I just kind of stop, and then I'll pick it up maybe later, someone else's advice, and then, But am I actually, from my sovereign self, like being present, what is my health journey? What do I need? Maybe I need more information. Maybe I need it from a different source. Maybe I need to take the courageous route of just trying things, but I know that it's not me out there trying things, but I within myself am taking notes and I'm looking at this as an actual journey, that I'm going to get better at my ability to show up for my body and myself and my health, rather than just look for the golden ticket to the perfect outcome that I've, created in my mind based on just what everybody else says you should be and do and look like. Right? So I guess that's another thing too. Am I outcome focused, or am I willing to let this be a process and let myself have my daily experience with something? Because if I'm only outcome focused, we can kind of even abandon ourselves to an outcome, which then can become this perfectionistic pursuit and can easily get in the way of us actually sustaining the thing that we're looking for and even getting to someplace near our outcome because we've made this like an all or nothing thing. And go check out my video on belief or believing in yourself and self-doubt, because I talk more about that. Another area too is to look at like, how do I face uncertainty? Because this can be an area where it can really show us whether we're like seated in our sovereignty, whether we're really centered in our sovereignty, or if we are overrun with like anxieties, fears, and then start abandoning ourselves and looking outward for somebody to sort of come and like fix a situation. So what is your relationship to uncertainty? Does uncertainty really throw you off? You know, can it throw you off completely? Like maybe if you start down a path and are pursuing a goal of some kind, or a creation, or a change, and then something pops up that feels overwhelming, or it throws it into question, do you give up? Do you feel like, you know, there's just no way of moving forward? And how quickly does that happen, right? And all of this is just to get curious, just to see, like, okay, these are going to be little signs for me. When I feel that in my body, or I notice that in my thoughts, or I see that in my behaviors, then this is a sign, hey, I'm abandoning myself, and I can reorient and recenter myself into my sovereignty. That I get to choose, even if I'm afraid, I get to choose. Even if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I have my back. And I get to choose what's next. I get to choose how I approach this. I get to choose my response. I get to take the time I need to have a response instead of a reaction. Because a reaction isn't going to necessarily get me to where I want. But if I take the time, I'm centering myself, I'm coming back to me, I can respond to whatever this is. Because ultimately, I know that I have my back. Ultimately, I'm going to be practicing and embodying my sovereignty. So, getting curious, getting clear, what are the signs where you're self-abandoning? And then what are just the little internal shifts, just for like reminding yourself, hey, I have a choice here. And I love that it's pretty simple, like ultimately, right? That it's really practice of awareness, getting present, and then just kind of like shifting it back. I will say, one of the things that really helped me to do this in more of like an embodied, like automatic way, I had to be done with self-abandonment. I had to be done with giving away my power, with waiting on other people, with being afraid of other people's opinions and reactions and all the things. I had to be done with that. And one of the things that helped me be done, like on a visceral level, was I allowed myself to like get in touch with my anger. Like I needed to get angry about what I was tolerating. Not necessarily angry at other people or even at myself, but just like feel impact of what happens when I do that. Because like when we're abandoning ourselves, we can also be sort of disassociating or avoiding the feeling of the impact of that, because we're like, oh, okay, that was relief. I didn't have to show up to a conflict. But there's a deeper experience as well, where when we sort of shut off our truth and we shut off our power, that also is really painful. And like I had to feel within me of like, whoa, I deserve so much better than what's happening here. I know who I am. I know that I'm kind and that I care about other people, and I'm like proactively showing up for other people. And when I finally sort of like woke up to the fact that people weren't doing that in my sphere because I was like overcompensating and sort of like, what's the term? Overactive in the giving, then I had to be like, hey, no, like I had to get angry about it. And so you can also do that, right? Where you can allow yourself to get in touch with, what does this make me feel when I just kind of allow or tolerate things that don't actually work for me? What does it feel in my body when I know something doesn't work for me? Because even if I've been used to shutting it off, like I can get more aware of, what does it feel like when I know something doesn't work for me? And then what does it like, tap into that anger a little bit, you know? You don't have to like lash out at people, and you likely won't if you're anything like me in how you came to this process. But like the anger and tapping into that sort of activated energy in like a positive way helps you to move into action, right? So if I'm getting aware of what doesn't work for me, and now I'm kind of using the energy within me to be like, you know, I will no longer tolerate this because I don't deserve that. I don't deserve that. And I'm not going to tell myself anymore that that's okay, you know? So just start identifying things in your life like, hey, that's really not okay. You know, even before you start saying it out loud, there's probably going to be a time where you were just beginning to say that to yourself internally of just really identifying and going like, hey, wait, that wasn't okay. Like, or this isn't okay, or I'm not okay with this, or, like that doesn't work for me, but this would, right? So like you kind of, it can be uncomfortable, but I'll say too, I think I said this on a different video, there was a time when that was happening, though it might have been a bit into like experiencing the anger, where I started enjoying it. I was like, oh, I like this feeling of being alive and being present to what I want. And it was just really nice. And so now these days I notice that feeling isn't anger so much. It's just this bit of sort of like life energy that comes in and goes, and it just like moves me into action. And I don't wait like I used to. Like I used to pause and be like, oh, and I would be fighting with my old self that, didn't feel safe to express. And it took risk taking. Like it feels like a risk when you're not used to that. It feels like you're taking this big risk to like express what you need to express or advocate for what you need to advocate for. So it's not easy, but it's really powerful, and it gets so much better when you do it. It gets better for you and your ability to do it, and it gets better for what happens in your life when you do that. When you show up and you choose sovereignty over fear, right? Maybe in this moment, if you kind of resonated with any of that, just feel within yourself, where do I feel and experience doneness? Right? Where do I feel it in me? This sort of doneness, like I'm done with any more of that self-abandonment. Now, like I said, it is a practice, right? But you getting in touch with that doneness will help you practice this and engage with it and turn it into a way of being, which is like something you walk out in life, right? I mean, not just literally walking, but you practice on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know, like, where are you at in your journey of sovereignty? Where are you at in your journey of maybe moving away from people pleasing and into advocating for yourself? What else do you want to talk about in regard to this? Because it's just so juicy and wonderful, and I love it. And I get more and more and more embodied with this every day, and more like excited about life and inspired, like no matter all the craziness happening. I said in another video, if I'm not dead yet, my story's not over. So there's more of this life to live no matter what's happening. And I'm here for it. So see you again soon.